Now, if you've already managed to create a lookup table, then here's how you take it to the next level. This video is going to be about buying the right cameras and lenses to really get the most out of your video. But if you haven't created a lookup table, do that first. Don't spend a single cent until you have shown to yourself and to anybody else you need to that you're willing to do the work to really take this to the highest level. Let me actually show you what this feed would look like if I did not create a lookup table. This is me turning the lookup table off. And this is with the lookup table on. That's free. Didn't pay a cent to create the lookup table. All the tools I used were free. And make sure you do the most you can with the free tools before you invest a lot of money. There's no purpose in spending all this money on better equipment if you're not going to use it to its, not maybe fullest extent, but at least a reasonable extent. So now let's talk about cameras. And I'm going to talk about what type of camera I personally use and why I use that camera. Your situation might be very different. The first thing you need to know is that I'm on camera for several hours a day, all right? So I'm not like a YouTuber that does like, 5-minute video a couple times a week. Between tutoring, group classes, pre-recorded videos like this, media interviews, on average, I'm on camera for about 8 or 9 hours a day on a light day. And during a very busy time of the year, for example, when college applications are due, I might be on camera for 12 to 15 hours a day. So that being said, it's important to me to not have film lights blasting at my eyes for 16 hours a day. Now, if you're only ever going to use this to do a couple of interviews, that's just half an hour, a few times, the issue of lights blasting at you is not quite so severe. So in my case, the film lights that I use, that I talked about in the last thing, they're not actually pointed directly at me. They're actually pointed backwards at the wall and reflected light is bouncing off at me. And that's very easy on the eyes. Now, what enables me to have that and it still works is that I have a large frame sensor in my camera. So let's talk about the three main types of cameras. You're gonna have a full frame camera, that's what I use. You can have an APS-C camera, it's a slightly smaller sensor, or you can have a 4/3, and that's again gonna be even smaller. Now for what I do, the reason I use a full frame camera is I want to be able to use it at comparatively lower light levels. At the light levels that I'm using right now, a 4/3 camera would just look not great. It would look it would look a little grainy. So that's the first reason that I use a full frame camera. The second reason that I use a full frame camera has to do with the type of lens that I use. And now we're going to get into a little bit of a discussion about how different lenses work, basically. Don't worry, we're not going to get too technical. I want you to imagine, you've probably seen maybe at some point in a magazine or a video, a model shoot. And you notice that the cameraman was like really far back using a telephoto lens. And you might have thought, well, if you're taking a picture of a person, why not just use a normal lens and move closer? The reason for that is if you're very close, the tip of your nose is physically, like percentage-wise, a lot closer to the camera than the rest of your body. Whereas if you're far away, even though your nose is still like an inch closer, that inch doesn't matter. It's like an inch over 50 feet compared to an inch over 2 feet. So that sort of big nose effect is what they're trying to avoid with that. And that's why they use those telephoto lenses from very far away. Now, if you have an APS-C camera and a telephoto lens, you would need to be even farther away. So to use a bigger lens, you need to be farther away. And if you have a smaller sensor, you need to be even farther away than that. And you can look at all the math on it. There's like a million different videos about this subject. Now, I'm using a 90mm macro lens. What I recommend for most people is an 85mm portrait lens. I'll put a link to both. The reason that I use a macro lens, by the way, has nothing to do with video. It's that I use this lens for other things as well, some of which are benefited by having those macro lens elements. If I was going to only use the lens just for video, for any interviews and nothing else, I'd actually use an 85mm portrait lens. And I'll put a link to both of those and you can decide to get whatever you want or neither. Now, having that type of lens means you need to be a little bit farther back. So right now, I'm about, I would say about 5 feet away from my camera, and that works. Now, on the other hand, if I was using an APS-C, I would have to be 7 or 8 feet, and that would be a little bit too far. And if I was using a 4/3 camera, I'd have to be outside the room, like hanging on a harness or something like that. That wouldn't really work. So because I want to use a lens with a bit of a longer throw, I end up preferring to use the full frame. So if you have a big, huge, giant room and you really want to look like a supermodel during your interviews, then what you would actually use is like a 135 millimeter telephoto lens. I haven't taken it that far, but you might feel differently. But I'll show you the lenses that I use, and I'll show you both the one that I'm currently using as well as the one that I would use if I was only going to use this just for interviews and nothing else. And I've tried out, but obviously I'm using one of them right now, and the portrait lens that I'm going to recommend, I've tried that out, and it works really well. It's a very fast lens. It adjusts very quickly, and when I say it's a fast lens, what I mean, the fast lens can mean two different things. I mean, it's a fast focusing lens, which means that if you move around a bit, it'll focus on you very quickly. I also mean that the aperture can open very wide. It can go all the way to f1.4, so that really allows you to shoot in lower light conditions well, to put it simply. Now, if you want to get into all the nuance of photography, there's millions of videos out there. So what I recommend is that. Now, there's going to be a couple more things. We're not done yet. I mean, this part is a bit of a production. You need to be able to get the feed from your camera into your computer. So first, you need to make sure you're using a mirrorless DSLR camera. That means the image goes directly from the lens to the viewfinder. That means like whatever the lens sees is what the digital viewfinder also sees. We're going to want to export that information into your computer. And for that, you're going to need something called an HDMI capture card. I tried out a few, and again, in the links, I'm going to show you the one that I use. The one that I use, I think it's really nice, it's really rugged. Other people have also given it great reviews, and I've used it for a long time for media interviews, for teaching online classes, tutoring, all that kind of stuff. And all of those components together can cost a lot. So if you're saying, well, I don't really have the resources for that, that's fine. The biggest difference you're going to get is from the lookup table. This is just taking it a little bit further than a lookup table. Even though this costs a lot more, it actually won't have as much consequence as a lookup table. Now, the final thing I want to bring up in this video is eye color. Now, if you have brown eyes, like I do, it's going to be harder to light your eyes. Let me explain why that is. Have you ever seen a cat's eyes at night? They kind of seem to glow. Cat's eyes are a little bit more reflective, allowing them to see well at night. And the same way that cat's eyes are very reflective, blue eyes, green eyes, and other lighter eye colors are very, very reflective. They're very easy to light. Brown eyes are very difficult to light. When I was growing up, I wondered why so many actors had blue eyes. I thought maybe it was something racial. It's not racial. It's just easier to light blue eyes. It's easier to make them look good on camera. It takes just like nothing to do it. Brown eyes are harder to light. Here's why. Brown eyes are like the extreme opposite of cat eyes. They're like light sponges. Instead of reflecting light, they just absorb light and absorb light and absorb light. So to make them just visible, make them look brown instead of just like they have no color at all, you need a decent amount of light or, big, huge camera. So if you have brown eyes, this will be harder. You will need more light or bigger camera sensors, better lenses, all that kind of stuff. If you have blue eyes, or if you green eyes, just point any camera in any direction, it'll look fine. So anyway, those are that's the equipment that you're going to need to just get this stuff working. I'm gonna talk about a little bit more equipment in the next video, but that's the big stuff. And nothing else I'm gonna talk about besides what we talk about here is gonna be particularly expensive. The stuff we're talking about in this video, this is what's gonna cost money. Now, again, if you don't have the budget, don't worry about it. Just use a lookup table. But if you do have the budget for it, this is a nice thing you can definitely do.